call the meeting to order. Welcome to the special meeting for Thursday night. And with that, I'll pass it over to the clerk to get things started.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll start with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the lands of Anishinaabe Nation. This spot where we gather is the traditional lands of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe. We also recognize that this land is now home to the Delaware Nation. This land was settled through the McKee Purchase Treaty of 1790, and we, as the beneficiaries of the treaty, must recognize our responsibilities, including our collective responsibilities to the land and water. Mr. Mayor, there is not a supplementary agenda item this evening, and we do have one disclosure of pecuniary interest by Councillor Thompson. Just to note, we have regrets tonight by Councillor Hall and Councillor Anderson. Virtually, we have Councillor Carmen McGregor on the Zoom call and Councillor Thompson, although he will not be voting. We'll move into the rules for council. For the council meeting, Rules for decorum at a council meeting. The municipality of Chatham-Kent supports open meetings that welcome debate of public policy issues in an atmosphere that is inclusive, integrity, civility, fairness, and respect for differing points of view. Anyone conducting themselves in a way that disturbs, disrupts, or impedes the orderly conduct of the meeting, interrupts or makes derogatory statements or hate speech, defamatory comments about councillors, staff, or speakers, or fellow members of the public may result in the removal from the premise. The use of posters, signage, and literature is also prohibited. Council, we received two deputations this evening, one from Mr. Vidler, and he could not attend this evening, so you received it via email. And we have one presentation tonight, Tara Cadeau, on behalf of the Board of Directors. And Tara, you're welcome to come to the podium now.
Anytime. Okay, Honorable Mayor Kniff and members of council. I am delivering this deputation today on behalf of the members of the Erie Shore Drive Property Owners Association in response to the preliminary report for the Burke Drainage Works dated June 18, 2023. We felt it important to provide additional context and to clarify key points of significance prior to council making any decisions. The significance of the shoreline, including the properties situated along Erie Shore Drive and the protection they provide to the Burke Drainage Works, cannot be understated. Contained within our full written submission, you will find references from several reports stressing the fact that the seawall and groin system are part of the Burke Drainage Works and have been found to be instrumental in protecting the shoreline. It is important for council to understand that the sandbank and shoreline was considered an integral part of the Burke Drainage Works and essential to the operation of the dike and protection of the agricultural lands. Without the sandbank, the embankment would likely fail and result in both the road and the 1,300 plus acres of prime farmland flooding. The preliminary report states, generally speaking, the walls and groins have not been maintained by the municipality or the landowners. With respect, the responsibility to repair and improve the seawall and groins rests solely on the Council of Chatham-Kent, who have failed in their obligation to do so. Chatham-Kent has never repaired or improved any of the shoreline work that they were responsible for since their construction and since Chatham-Kent amalgamated with the Township of Harwich in 1998. As the seawall and groins continue to fail due to the lack of maintenance by the municipality, the property owners of Erie Shore Drive have had no choice but take it upon themselves to implement measures to protect the embankment with their own resources. The residents have been forced to bear the burden of 100% of the cost of protecting the sandbank since the 1970s. The preferred option of the preliminary report of 2023 appears to be the construction of a new inland dike that is likely not strong enough in and of itself to withstand the energy of the wave attack of Lake Erie. Under this option, the agricultural landowners in Chatham-Kent can avoid the costs associated with maintaining the seawall and groins by recommending the construction of a more cost-effective inland dike, provided that the residents of Erie Shore Drive continue to maintain the standard of lakeshore protection at their own expense. For a long time, Chatham-Kent was disputing whether or not the seawall and groins were constructed under the provisions of the Drainage Act. In a recent decision of Acton Drainage Referee Right, it was confirmed that all of the shoreline works on the lakeside of the homes of Erie Shore Drive were constructed under the provisions of the Drainage Act. We are now certain that for the vast majority of the length of Erie Shore Drive, there are existing bylaws in place for those works in Lake Erie. That is the seawall and the groins that can be repaired and improved under the provisions of the Drainage Act. In the preliminary report of 2023, the engineer repeatedly stresses that the residents of Erie Shore Drive have not paid into the municipal protection. As the engineer is well aware, the assessment is based on benefit. The engineer who prepared those historical reports recognized that the benefit of the dike not failing was predominantly for the agricultural lands as well as the municipal road, not for the property owners along the shore. The report further states that the lakefront property owners would like to have a high degree of shoreline protection provided for their benefit, but are generally of the opinion they should not bear any significant cost for this endeavor. I assure you, the property owners of Erie Shore Drive would be agreeable to not only shoreline protection that maintains the dike, but also the beach, and would expect to pay their fair share, as we have always said, but a fair share that is distributed among all those who benefit from the drainage works. We also remind Council that the Erie Shore Drive Property Owners Association has proceeded with an application under the provisions of the Drainage Act as it relates to the repair of the Burke drainage works. Many of the issues raised in the preliminary report are currently before the Court of the Drainage Referee as set out by the Drainage Act. Our request to Council of Chatham-Kent, who are responsible to repair and improve the drainage works, is to do so in accordance with all of its bylaws and responsibilities under the provisions of the Drainage Act. We are asking that Council shelve the preliminary report at this time, pending the completion of the issues and the matter before the Court of the Drainage Referee. Once the matter before the Court of the Drainage Referee has been finally determined with no further appeals, it would be appropriate for Council to consider the information set out in the preliminary report, taking into consideration any decision the Court of the Drainage Referee. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Okay, we'll move on to Infrastructure and Engineering Services. 11A, Preliminary Report for the Burke Drainage Works. We have a presentation, and I'll ask Mr. Edward Soldo to come forward, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Just for the benefit of the public, my name is Edward Soldo. I'm the General Manager of Infrastructure and Engineering Services. Tonight we have two presentations for Council to provide some context to the report and the recommendations before you. We'll have two presenters. Our first presenter will be Brigham Barlow, who is the Manager of Drainage, and will be followed by Dennis McCready, who is a senior project engineer with RC Spencer and is the appointed engineer for this assignment, who's going to present an overview of the preliminary report. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brigham to provide the first presentation.
If I stand closer, is that better? that was closer. So how about this? Is that better? Okay. So my presentation is basically a brief recap of the highlights that have got us to where we are tonight and what the action on the table for tonight's agenda is. So I'll start with a brief overview. The Burke Drainage Works was originally constructed in 1914 under the Drainage Act and consists of dike structures along the shore of Lake Erie with internal drains and pumps to remove water from the lands within the protected area. Groins and seawalls were established in Lake Erie in the 1930s and 40s with the intention of reducing the wave impact reducing the impact wave action has on the dike structure. Residences and the roadway, known as Erie Shore Drive, were eventually established along a substantial portion of the main dike surface. Over the past several decades, conditions of the area have changed due to rising lake levels, shifting of lake bed, private shoreline alterations, land use improvements, and deterioration of drainage features. Concerns regarding flooding and erosion have occurred since 1950s, most recently with a rise in lake levels in 2018 and 19, which renewed concerns. Short-term solutions at that time for this emergency were recommended by Golder Associates. Golder indicated that the solutions were short-term in nature and that a long-term solution to mitigate flooding risk was required. Many reports, studies, improvements, and works of maintenance have been completed throughout the history of Burke drainage works, yet issues along the dike remain. Strong southerly winds occurring during times of elevated lake levels cause wave attack on the dike surface. This poses a threat of catastrophic dike failure due to increased hydraulic pressure and overtopping of the dike surface. To determine whether maintenance or repair was needed to the Burke drainage works, Council appointed R.C. Spencer Associates to investigate solutions under the Drainage Act. Dennis McCready, PN of R.C. Spencer Associates, has prepared a preliminary report under Section 10 of the Drainage Act with recommendations for Council to proceed on these concerns. The report brought forward by administration has drawn the two recommendations from the engineer's report for Council's consideration to vote on tonight. So the first recommendation is to proceed with the recommended option, which is option 1A. Option 1A has been recommended by the engineer as the most suitable option. It consists of moving the existing lakeshore drain away from the toe of the existing dike and constructing a higher dike to the north side of Erie Shore Drive. This solution is the most cost-effective and will protect the dike against overtopping while improving the threshold of hydraulic pressure the dike can withstand. And so just to be clear, the dotted line is the existing ground, and what we're proposing is to build an elevated and wider dike to this side and move the drain away from the current toe dike where it is. I'm not going to go into much more detail than that because Mr. McCready is following up with a report that will go into much further detail on that recommendation. The second recommendation is the abandonment of groins and seawalls. The term abandonment refers to the Drainage Act process to take drains out of a municipality's formal Drainage Act infrastructure, including for the purpose of maintenance and repair under the Drainage Act. This recommendation is based on the engineer's conclusion that the existing groins and seawalls have greatly deteriorated and serve no useful purpose. And also importantly, repairing the groins and seawalls to the standards set out in the current bylaws would not provide the degree of flood protection desired by the lakefront owners. And my last slide, just going to run through the options that are not recommended. Option 1B is the same as 1A with an added pond and overflow channel to assist the internal drains inside the Burke system. This option is in this report because it was reviewed, but it is not recommended as it was found that the drainage within the Burke system is adequate. Option 2 consists of offshore breakwaters, and option 3 consists of continuous large rock revetment. These two options are not recommended because Council does not have the authority to proceed without a landowner petition under Section 4 of the Drainage Act, as these are new features and not an improvement to the existing Burke dike. And those are the two options there. Those are just snapshots. Again, Mr. McCready will go into further detail outlining what these entail. And finally, the alternative of do nothing is not recommended as it does not address the threat of catastrophic dike failure. And that's the end of my presentation. And Mr. McCready will be next to do his presentation on the preliminary report itself.
Honorable Mayor and members of council, I'm going to give you a fairly brief overview of what this preliminary report involves. Now, preliminary reports under the Drainage Act, they're not meant to be adopted, or in the sense that none of the work we're mentioning here is cast in stone. It's just to give council some guidance into what the appropriate course of action might be on this project. So if it were to proceed to a final report, there's still lots of room for changes and input from ratepayers and so on, plus a whole appeal process under the Drainage Act. I'll start by just going over the basic watershed for the Burke Drainage Works. And you can see there's, oh, it's not going up. Oh, well, I'll go without it. The red area you see there is part of the Burke Drainage Works that's called the Burke Pump Area. And that's separate from the blue area, which we show there as the Rondo Pump Area. Both have their own separate pump systems, but they both comprise part of the Burke Drainage Works. You can see at the bottom of the picture is Lake Erie. Off the page towards the right would be the entrance into Erie O, and off the page to the left would be Erie Beach. Erie O Road runs right down through the center of the watershed, and on the northerly edge you've got Lagoon Road bordering the watershed. At the very west side of the watershed is Bisnet Line. So that gives you basically the area that's involved with the Burke Drainage Works. And what I'd like to show on this second slide, you can see, I guess if we start at the top right, there's a heavy line up there, and that indicates where the Arda Dike, dike number A3 was constructed. And that's high substantial dike that was built under the Arda Dike program. Just below that, there's another solid line right on Lake Erie, which is the Arda Dike A2 section. And then further down at the bottom of the page to the left is a shorter section, which is Arda Dike A1. And they were all three were constructed at the same time by means of a government grant under the Arda Dike program. Now, the most critical section of the Burke Drainage Dike system is that area between the A1 and A2 dike along Erie Shore Road. And that's the section that we're studying under this report. The Burke Drainage Works itself, it's a system that has at least three different components. One, there's external drains that go around the perimeter of the watershed that divert water from the higher lands away from the Burke drainage area. There's also an internal system of gravity drains in the Burke drainage area, which conveys water over to the two pump stations, one for the Burke area and the other for the Rondo Bay area. So the Burke Drainage Works itself is protected from Lake Erie and Rondo Bay by an extensive systems of dikes, groins, and other protective works. And as I mentioned, the most critical portion of the dike that we're studying is that section of Erie Shore Drive between Magetchi's Pond and that area A1 dike. Now, the watershed area of the Burke Drains, approximately 726 hectares of land, and much of that land lies below the still water level of Lake Erie. The watershed consists of 75 agricultural properties and several roads. And also McGetchie's Pond is part of the watershed as it has a high water overflow culvert beneath Erie Road that can discharge excess water into the Rondo Bay pump station. There's approximately, if we look at the lakefront properties, there's approximately 153 year-round and seasonal residential properties located along the shore of Lake Erie on the south side of Erie Shore Drive. These lakefront properties, though, are outside the limits of the Burke Drainage Work dike systems and were never originally intended to be an area that was going to be protected by a dike work. Now, as you all know by seeing what's gone on there, there's been high static water levels in Lake Erie that have occurred, on several occasions, 2019, 1997, 1986, and certainly other years prior to that. And you've seen more and more that flooding and wave attack is becoming a recurring situation and seems to be becoming more serious every time it happens. And everyone's aware that the water's definitely overtopped Erie Shore Drive in several locations and on many occasions. And the rising water levels and wave attack is posing a real flood threat to the Burke Drainage Works. The factors that contribute to flooding are, to start with, the water level in Lake Erie, plus the combined influences of what they call lake setup, excuse me, which is a tilting of the lake caused by persistent wind, and also wave action generated by wind. So those three things accumulate the static water level, the lake tilt, and wave run up on the beach area. And wave run up depends on the slope of your beach. If you've got a gradual sloping beach, the wave run up dissipates and reaches a lower level. Whereas if you have a steel sheet pile wall, the waves tend to hit that wall and go straight up to a higher depth. The water will come down and scour away the base, as we've seen outside the wall, which means you end up with deeper water near the retaining wall, which in turn just allows bigger waves to come to the shore. So it's kind of a situation that gets worse with time when you have a steel pile wall instead of a gradual sloping beach. As was mentioned, this drain was originally constructed under a report of George McCubbin in 1914. And since then, there have been 14 other engineers' reports that have been prepared under the provisions of the Drainage Act, covering different shoreline works, groins, walls, embankment work, and so on. The three reports that were done in 1973 were the three sections of Arda Dike that I mentioned were carried out under a government program. They provide the substantial dikes that you'll see along those sections. There's also been, we've reviewed previous studies, engineering studies that have been carried out that I've listed there. And the first one, the 1986 study, I was actually an employee for Tajman Case at that time, working for Ed Dries to assist him in preparation of that report. So I'm familiar with the designs and quantity estimates and cost estimates and different options that we looked at back then. Sorry. Okay, if we look at this option 1A, this is the option that we ultimately recommended, and what it's involving, a little hard to see, but in this area, there's going to be a compacted earth fill that builds up a higher dike than what the road elevation is. We're going to look at putting a storm sewer system with catch basins. I keep losing it. With catch basins along the road on both sides. And that storm sewer will travel along the road towards the east, where it will enter a pump station that'll be pumped directly back into Lake Erie. Where it's low through this area, that's the existing, excuse me, lakeshore drain, which we're going to relocate and build a new drain towards the north. And basically that's most of the work involved with option number 1A. Option 1B is similar to option 1A, but we've looked at providing an additional few features here, one being a relief drain that would connect over to a pond, and then there'd be a second separate pump station that could be used to lower water levels in the Burke drainage scheme. Now that's something that is optional, and when you look at the existing capacity of the Burke drainage pump, I think it's something that's not necessary to be carried out at this time. I can show you here as well. That's the pump I'm talking about for option 1B. This pump right here would be the separate pump that connects to the storm sewer that goes all the way along the road. And that would pump directly out to Lake Erie as well. We're not connecting that storm sewer to the Burke drainage system at all. We're keeping it totally isolated so the storm sewer won't inundate the Burke drainage area, and make sure it goes to a separate outlet directly back to the lake. No, option number 2, that's the work that's recommended in the Baird report. And you can see with it, there's some, can't see, oh, there we go. There's an offshore breakwater that would be constructed at several locations, and it would be tied over to the beach with a steel pile wall. And the idea of that would be to help catch sand and help rebuild a beach area. And that's what they're proposing with option number 2. Option number 3 is illustrates the work that was recommended under the Zuzek report. And what we're looking at there is constructing a dike made out of armor stone to a substantial height above existing ground that would afford protection from high lake levels and wave action. And it would end up being, in some places, substantially higher than the backyard elevations. And you can see here where there's existing steel walls and tiebacks, which would be totally covered by the armor stone. So that's what Zuzek report has recommended as an option. Finally, the costs for the 3 options. Option 1A, where we relocate the lakeshore drain and construct a new dike, and can also construct a dedicated storm sewer and pump station to drain the road and front yard areas, is $9,947,000. Option A, which includes option 1B, which includes option 1A, plus the relief drain and second pump station, is approximately $923,000 more expensive, for a total of $9,870,500. And then substantially higher is option 2, which is the work recommended in the Baird report, which is the offshore breakwaters, the $61,600,000. And finally, the work recommended in the Zuzek report, which is the Armorstone Dike on the lake side of the cottages is $83,325,000. So our conclusions were that we're recommending option 1A as the preferred alternative. Now, it's something that the municipality can proceed with under Section 78 of the Drainage Act without requiring a petition of any kind, since the Burke Drainage Works is an existing drain. It'll provide increased flood protection to the lands to a level similar to that of the provided by the Arda dikes. And when we looked at option 2 and 3, in my view, a petition would be required under Section 4 of the Drainage Act from the lakefront landowners before any type of flood protection improvements to the residential properties could be considered, basically because the original area requiring drainage that was petitioned for under the Drainage Act was the agricultural farmlands. And essentially, there were no cottages too much to speak of back in 1914. And when I looked at a report of Bill Briscoe, another engineer, in 1968, he estimated that only about 10% of the present cottages in 1968 were present at that time. So there was even very little development at that time. Most of it has occurred since 1968. So without having a petition under Section 4, the engineer has no authority to increase the watershed size, add additional area requiring drainage without that petition. And the municipality would have no authority to assess the cottage owners without first having a valid petition from them. I believe the municipality had sent a notice out, not sure when, probably over a year ago, giving the lakefront property owners an opportunity to have time to generate a petition for flood protection for the lakefront properties, but I don't believe that ever was sent to council. And finally, the do-nothing alternative. It's not something we're recommending because the integrity of the Burke drainage system is definitely threatened. You know, there's been on more than one occasion where there's been great expense in bringing in large concrete blocks to create or raise the road as a dam, and that's been done on more than one occasion to help try and channel the water to isolated locations where it would enter the lakeshore drain. And of course, agricultural properties that meet the OMAFR requirements may be eligible for the 1/3 grant from the province of Ontario. And that's my my report. Thank you.
I'll open it up for questions now. Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. At this time, I'm just prepared to move the recommendations, and then we can follow up with discussion. So I would move that council consider the preliminary report for the Burke Drainage Works and instruct the drainage engineer to proceed with preparation of a final report for the recommended option 1A under Section 78 of the Drainage Act, and that council initiate abandonment under Section 84(2) of the Drainage Act of all groins and seawalls that are part of the Burke Drainage Work. And I move that.
Councillor B. McGregor.
So seconded.
Okay. Any comments, or you want?
Yeah, I just want, just briefly, I think this is moving forward, and we need to prevent any further risks that are the citizens in the agricultural land and Erie, everyone there that's at risk if this dike becomes compromised again. Doing nothing is not the right thing to do. It's around 100 years. This has been kicked down the road, and everyone's done the best thing they felt possible. And I think that we need to invest in this area to make sure that we're not looking at this again in 15 or 20 years. Thank you.
Still can't hear anything back here, but I don't know if everybody can turn off the mic or there's no sense of staying here if you can't hear what people are saying.
Can you hear what I'm saying? So I'm just wondering if it's the side mics here that's the issue. Okay, so can I, councillors, can I ask you that get close to the mic, and if you sound real loud around you, then you're doing the right job. And so certainly if you can't hear, please just put up your hand, wave. I'll make sure that they get closer, okay?
Did you want me to repeat that?
Yes, please, go ahead, councillor.
Okay, yeah, you heard the motion, but I just think that this is a moving forward motion. I think that preventing any damage from the risk of the dikes being compromised again in the future, doing nothing is not the right thing to do. And I don't think that councils in the past didn't intentionally do the right thing. I don't know, but what we need to do as a council today is, as we move forward, that we make sure that in 15, 20 years, we're not sitting here again, or other people. Thank you.
Councillor Doyle?
Thank you, Mayor. So I've got a couple of questions here first. So it said we got some rough numbers in there with the assessment that some of the farms are going to have. So my question would be, what would our biggest farm in that area going to be, like size wise, so we know what the actual assessment is going to be for some of these places?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Thank you for your question. I'm not sure that we have offhand the exact what the largest farm would be, but I can give you sort of a rundown of, I think we're expecting somewhere in the range of $3,500 an acre. So if it's a 100-acre farm, it would be a $350,000 assessment that would be eligible for grant from OMAFRA at 33%. So they would pay 66% of that assessment.
Okay, thank you. And then it said in there that the farmlands have to meet requirements. Do you know what those requirements would be?
The farmlands have to meet requirements?
Yeah, on that slide, it said that there's requirements, providing the farmlands meet certain requirements, they may get the 33%. So I just wondered what the requirements.
So that is referring to the farm tax class status. So it's basically that there's owned agricultural lands.
Okay, thank you. And then what would you be doing with the road? Would you be moving it? I don't think 3 meters. I don't know if 3 meters is wide enough. Or would you be moving the road up onto the new dike that's already there? What would you be doing with the road, current road, and how would the homeowners get to their homes at that point?
That might be better answered by the engineer, but the current proposal is to leave the road where it is and basically not do anything with the road at this point in time. Of course, things can change, as this is a preliminary report. So as things finalize, some details become finalized, some of those things might change.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, I would like to make a motion to postpone. As requested by the Erie Shore Property Owners Association tonight, I move that recommendations 1 and 2 regarding the preliminary report for the Burke Drainage Works be postponed until a final decision of the Court of the Drainage Referee on the Outstanding Drainage Act hearing on this matter including any appeals.
Councillor Story?
I heard a point of order before I.
Councillor Crew?
Yeah, I just have a point of order, because my motion's on the floor, so I don't know, you can't have a motion on top of a motion.
Thank you for the question. So Councillor Doyle has just put a motion to postpone till a certain time. So we just need right now to have the discussion about the postponement. If that passes, then that stops your motion. If that fails, then we continue on with the main motion.
Councillor Story?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does that mean I can make a comment to this
Well,
motion, or do I
I'm
second
looking
it?
for a seconder right now.
I second that motion
Okay.
by Councillor Doyle. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Doyle, I'll go to you for comments on it, but only to the deferral. We're not talking about any other issues with just deferring it. So is there anything else you wanted to add?
Not really. I think it's pretty straightforward. The Erie Shore Drive Homeowners Association has something going through the drainage board right now. So on their request, I feel like we can wait for that to go through. That's it.
Councillor Story, you want anything to add to the discussion on the deferral?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do believe that the request as made by the Erie Shore Drive Property Owners Association is a reasonable one, and I would feel more comfortable if we waited until the Section 79 notice has been addressed by the drainage referee in the context of these recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor B. McGregor, followed by Councillor Bondi.
Thank you. Do we have any idea of a timeline for that process and the impacts of appeals to that process? So how long we could be looking at waiting for a decision if we're postponing?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. To those who don't know me, I'm David Taylor, Director of Legal Services for the municipality. So a preliminary motion or a preliminary decision has been made on some procedural matters at that hearing, Councillor. That has then been appealed by the property owners group that brought the original application. So that appeal will move to through the court system. That will likely take a year to 18 months. I can't estimate exactly, but that'll take some time. Then what would happen, depending on which way that appeal goes, the matter would return back to the referee for consideration of kind of the main portion of kind of the action that they have brought. That also could be subject to appeals. So as with all legal proceedings, we can't give a precise timeline, but I can tell you it's likely several years before those appeals happen, the hearing happens, and then you get back to the potential for further appeals. Again, it could be shorter, but that's a best estimate.
I appreciate that response. Thank you.
Councillor Bondi.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I guess this would be for Dave as well. If this appeal process could take, say, outside 5 years, if the dike or dam or whatever, if it was to fail within that 5-year period, what's the exposure to the municipality? Not only just the people that live there, obviously, because that would be catastrophic, but to the corporation.
Thank you, Councillor. It would be an appropriate matter for us to talk about in closed session. I wouldn't be comfortable talking about exposure in an open session. That would be a legal advice matter. But what I can say to this issue is administration does not support the idea of a postponement for exactly the risk to the community that this poses. The engineer here has produced his best recommendation to address, as he described, the risks of high water levels impacting the dike and what those would have to public safety. And so administration, after discussing this and reviewing this, absolutely supports those recommendations, would not support or does not recommend the postponement to address those safety risks.
Okay, so I think I can understand that if we were to postpone it, it could be 5 years before we initiate any sort of repair, which obviously doesn't take, a short period of time. So we would be leaving this failed dike potentially for 6 or 7 years, and we could see a water rise. This isn't really a question, I'm just talking to myself, but.
If I could though, Councillor, I do
Sure.
want to clarify, I did not say 5 years. I described a couple of different time periods. So I just want to make sure we don't use that too easily. It could be several years, but we can't estimate.
Oh, I know you can't, I get that, but just reading between the lines, it's gonna be a while, so we would effectively be doing nothing to protect everybody at risk for at least a number of years, and then we're into a different council too. So I won't support a deferral. I think if we're going to act, we should do something tonight. You know, I've been sitting here for a long time, and we've been talking about this for a long time, and people before me were talking about this for a long time as well. So here we are. I really hope that council makes a decision tonight on action, because I'm not comfortable not repairing it, whether that be, you know, the super repair or the minimal repair. But I think we really should do something to protect everybody's interests. And kicking it down the road, to me, is something we're very good at. I just hope we don't do it again tonight. Thanks.
Councillor Finn?
Thank you, Worship. I guess it's an engineering question. If, say this spring, we have a repeat of what put us into this predicament, what would happen to that dike? Would it hold as it sits today?
If we were to have a repeat of the same conditions that we've recently gone through, I would think the dike would fail unless you get back in and reinstall all those huge concrete blocks and earth fill and reconstruct spillways for the excess water to get over the dike more safely. And that's been done at least a couple of times in the past, and you'd have to repeat it again if that conditions were to happen the same again.
Seeing no other questions. Oh, Councillor Scotchy?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. A question to Mr. Taylor. In the motion, Mr. Taylor, it says the final decision. You kind of laid out a couple different scenarios. Is it fair to say that the initial appeal would be a lot more prompt than a final decision? Because I know that you said there's an opportunity for a secondary decision based on the next appeal. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the existing matter right now is really about just procedure. So one of the first things that happens in a legal proceeding is you determine some things about procedure and about kind of the scope of what's happening in the hearing and things like that. That's what's been decided and that's what's been appealed. It hasn't got to the substance of the question that was brought to the drainage referee. And so I would interpret this motion as being after that appeal is resolved, the matter would be back before the referee. You would then the referee would be really ruling on the substantive issue that the property owners brought forward, an allegation that these need to be repaired, and the Chatham-Kent has to pay damages for things that occurred. That would really be the decision that would kind of have kind of the most significance to finalizing that hearing. So I wouldn't anticipate that there'd be really any benefit in waiting until the appeals of the procedural matters, because that's just really an early step in the hearing. So as we understand this motion, it would be after really the final kind of hearing on the main issue that was brought to the referee. Plus any appeals as indicated.
Yeah, thank you. I guess the challenge I'm having is I understand where the direction of this motion. I have some questions to ask, and this kind of motion doesn't enable me to ask those questions. So I guess I'll just see how the voting permits here. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote, and over to you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Council. We don't have our recorded microphones here in this facility, so I will be doing roll call for the voting. Council, so we are voting on the motion to postpone at this point, and it's what's on the screen right now. I will read it out just for the public and for the people here. As requested by the Erie Shore Drive Property Owners Association tonight, I move that recommendation 1 and 2 regarding the preliminary report for the Burke Drain Works be postponed until a final decision of the Court of the Drainage Referee on the outstanding Drainage Act hearing on this matter, including any appeals. So we'll go through. We have 3 people absent and 1 conflict, so we'll have 14 votes. Counselor Allen. Counselor Bondi.
No.
Counselor Sakachi.
Yes.
Counselor Crew.
No.
Counselor Doyle.
Yes.
Counselor Finn.
No.
Counselor Jubenville.
Yes.
Counselor McGrail.
No.
Counselor B. McGregor.
No.
Counselor C. McGregor.
No.
Counselor Pinsino.
No.
Counselor Story.
Yes, pardon me, yes.
Counselor Wright. Mayor Caniff.
No.
The motion fails 4-10. We'll move back to the main motion.
Any other questions regarding the main motion? Counselor Story.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a few comments, and I do have a few questions. I wanted to thank Ms. Cadeau for her presentation and for representing the position of the Erie Shore Drive Property Owners Association. I want to assure you that we do take this issue very seriously. I appreciate the opportunity to learn more about it as a new counselor. And the fact that we're having this special meeting, I think, indicates the serious nature that we take it as a council, and it's important that we hear you today and what you have to say. And I want to thank the staff of the municipality for many years of work on this file, Brigham, Ryan, our engineers, Mr. McCready, Mr. Johns, as well as the many people who have worked on this file to this point, as we've heard, and Dave and Emily. It's a very long list, over a century. So I have a few questions I'd like to ask probably the engineer, but there was a question raised in the deputation about concerns about the new dike listed in option 1A not being sufficient to address the current issues. Could someone address that, please?
Yes, the dike. Okay. The dike proposed in option 1A is to a similar height as the Arda dikes, so it is to a high elevation and level of protection.
Thank you. So would that protect that'll protect the municipal infrastructure, so the municipal road, the landowners north of the dike, like the agricultural lands north of the dike? I assume that with your map, the Erie Road, the village of Erie and the farmland north of Erie Shore Drive, but will that protect the structures of the cottages on Erie Shore Drive itself?
It'll protect the farmland, the road infrastructure inside the diking system, which includes Erie Road, which is access to Erie would be protected. The cottages themselves still would not be within the dike system, so they wouldn't be protected by the dike. The only difference they would see is an improved storm sewer drainage system along the road, which would help get rid of, when waves do overtop and flood on their front yards and the road, it would help get rid of that water. Utilities would be protected in that the way it is now, if the road overtops, the whole road could cut away at the location where the road's overtopped, and that would endanger utilities.
Okay, thank you. On the page 3 of your presentation, you mentioned that the Burke Drainage Works is protected from Lake Erie and Rondo Bay, and Rondo Bay are protected by the dikes, the grounds, and other protective groins, sorry. So why would there not be groins in the recommended option of 1A?
Okay, yeah, but the reason we've looked at that, now with all the cottages present along the shoreline, it gets very expensive to come in and do groin work because you'd be basically working off of barges, and it gets expensive to look at that. We'd have to look at groins that are substantially higher and bigger than what was originally put in the 1930s to 1950 era. because of rising lake levels and so on.
And that was included in the option 3, like the larger groin option, like the larger groins would, or was there any
Yes,
groin option?
option 2, or excuse me, yeah, option 2 was the groins, the offshore breakwaters with the steel walls that tie back to the shoreline that would help catch sand. Option 3 was the big armor stone dike on the lake side of the cottages.
Okay, thank you. So the 33 1/3 grant from the province, that would be maybe agricultural property owners may be eligible for that. Would any other property owners be eligible for that type of financial relief?
No, under the Drainage Act, grants are provided only to privately owned agricultural lands that meet what they call the ADIP requirements, which basically means the property has to be eligible for the farm tax credit. Then that farming property would be eligible for the 1/3 grant. The Drainage Act itself says that grants may be available. So there's absolutely no guarantee, but in almost all situations, grants are available. Especially if you warn the ministry a year or two ahead of time, they can start budgeting.
Right, that's a big may, obviously. If the cottages had not been there the last 60, 70 years, because you mentioned like the 50s were where many were built or after that, and the shoreline had been exposed to the lake the last 70 odd years, have the cottages and the work done by the residents provided some benefit, having the cottages there by blocking the wave action and by blocking some of that energy being mitigated down to the dike and the farmland?
Yeah, it's hard to say that there's a net benefit by having there. As I said, when vertical seawalls are put in, the water doesn't run up on a gradual sand beach and dissipate its energy. It hits the walls, goes straight up, and then violently comes straight back down, scours out the material, makes the water deeper at the wall, and deeper water results in deeper waves or higher waves.
Thank you. Do you know what the lake levels are right now, roughly?
No, I don't have the
Okay,
current.
do you know roughly of what it is compared to the, like 2019 when during the high water level, the flooding issues?
It's got to be down considerably from what I've seen, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your expertise on that. To be clear, it's not my intent or desire to delay, and I do not support the do nothing option. And I do agree that that action is critical. I spent a great deal of time in this area. I was a summer student working for Harwich Township in the late 90s during the last bout of flooding, and I did see it firsthand. And I remember that water pouring through the roadway quite vividly. I think we're facing an existential crisis with this issue, not only along Erie Shore Drive, but across Chatham-Kent, in terms of how we deal with erosion, more extreme weather, lake energy, and wave action. So I really think this is an issue that we do need to address. I think we do need to follow the proper processes and through the Drainage Act and through really lobbying our provincial and federal counterparts as well to provide support, because municipalities should not be responsible for dealing with this on their own. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just have a couple quick questions. If we go through with the 1A, can we add the 1B option down the road if needed?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Caniff, and thank you for your question. Yes, that can be done. That can be petitioned for at any point in time, even if the other works is already up and coming.
Okay, and then my second question, what happens to the new dike if the sandbank is compromised? Specifically, would it require the houses then to break the waves from the new dike?
I think that's probably a more technical question that I'll refer to Mr. McCready.
Yeah, what would happen in that case? Yeah, the cottages and houses that are there now would, as they have in the past, act as a sort of a barrier to slow the waves down. Their situation wouldn't be any different.
Okay, thank you. I guess in my, most of the damage to them is gonna be on the back of their house, on the lake side. So for us to get the water out of the front of their house, the back of their house might be gone by that point. So that's all. Thank you.
Councillor Pincinel, followed by Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the engineer. By building this new dike, you said the road was going to stay where it's at. There would be no need to put blocks and that on it if the water was to rise like it was again in 2019. The water can go across the road, so the road would remain open, other than it would have the water across it. But we're not putting blocks on it again or any of that we did last time.
Right, yeah, that would be the idea, that you wouldn't need to put the blocks back in. It depends on how much wave action there is and how much water comes in between the cottages and ends up on the road. But the drain we're proposing at this point would get rid of about, if you looked at the front lawn area and the road area, you remove about 8 inches of water a day with that storm sewer and pump station.
Okay,
So I wouldn't say that the road may at some time not be passable if the wave action was
Right.
significant enough. But
Right.
for most times, it's really going to help open the road a lot quicker.
Mhm. I feel for the lakefront property owners, but it seems like prior councils keep dropping this hot potato and, as it was said earlier, kick the can down the road. And I think we honestly need to stop kicking the can down the road. I think we need to make a decision tonight. I think that's the right decision right there. And as far as the what they've set up for the potential assessment rationale, I think that's relatively fair as well. The farm's going to carry the bulk of it, and I think they get the bulk of the benefit from it. So it's not perfect, but I think it's as close to perfect as we're going to get. Thank you.
Councillor Sakachi, followed by Councillor Finn.
Thank you, Your Worship. Forgive me for this question. It might sound somewhat ignorant, but it's a true kind of inquiry. Does this seem like a very, like, I would guess that most drainage schemes that you're assessing doesn't have a $9 million fix. Is that an accurate statement?
I'm sorry, didn't quite.
Sorry, I would guess that most drainage assessments that you do and work would not be a $9 million fix or repair. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, when you see assessments of 3,000 an acre, you know, on average land that's maybe worth 15,000 an acre, that gets to be a lot. Hope these lands, though, I would think are much higher valued lands with the black muck soil and so on. Very productive.
Yeah, and the reason why it's like, it's getting the reports, last week, although we've got several reports, the challenges for me is simply the cost associated with this. And I know there was some conversations about, may receive one third back, but there's a lot of people in that area that's already suffered significant loss. And I was speaking to somebody, yesterday, that there's just no way that they're going to be able to basically pay their assessment. So from that perspective, what's the deferral program like on the costs associated with these repairs?
Yeah, if this project were to proceed with a report under the Drainage Act that recommends construction, first an engineer would prepare the report and deliver it to the municipality. The Drainage Board or Council would consider that report and decide either to adopt it or send it back for changes to the engineer. And when you get to the point where the report gets adopted, then there is an appeal process to the Ontario Drainage Tribunal, which is not the drainage referee that was referred to earlier, it's a more informal court that decides design issues and assessment issues. So there is that appeal process. After the meeting to consider the report, and if the report's adopted, there's a court of revision meeting held with the Drainage Board that'll hear assessment appeals, and they have authority to make changes to assessments. And if owners aren't happy, excuse me, if owners aren't happy with that, they can appeal onto the Drainage Tribunal to appeal their assessment to them as well. So there's a number of checks and balances. Sure.
Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify your question, Councillor Sakachi, are you also wondering, like, once assessments are doled out, is there an option for landowners to spread their costs out over time? So any assessment can be debentured over 5, 10, or 15 years. That is at prime plus 1%, and there is also a fee for debenturing, which I couldn't tell you what that is off the top of my head, and it's something fairly reasonable.
So essentially, really, if you're already struggling with finances, that's unattainable.
That's correct.
So I do appreciate your time last night, taking my call late at night to ask you a lot of questions, because this is obviously a very convoluted and confusing matter, because there's so many reports to go through, so much history. Regan, I'm not sure if this is a question for yourself or for the engineer, but when it comes to, so when we discussed this yesterday, you said that there would be some benefits to the cottage owners or the house owners that are in that area, because it is allowing for the transfer of some water into, basically back into the lake, into the spillways. Is there a way that you can, I know you can't say exactly, but is there a way you can kind of address how much benefit that would be? Are we talking it's going to be a little benefit? Are we going to talking about it's a big benefit, or is it really just going to be dependent on the height of the height level of the lake?
I think that's a question that Mr. McCready has to answer. As far as the cost goes, it's a divvying of the cost, right? So it's, if he thinks so-and-so is going to pay a certain percentage and the landowners are going to pay a certain percentage, if the cost is astronomical, they're going to pay a large amount of money. But if it's a cheap cost, so to speak, they would pay a small amount of money. So as far as, the benefits of flooding, that's something that Mr. McCready would have to answer. So I can turn that back over to Mr. Okay. The debenture is 1.5%, and that does include administrative fees.
Yes, as far as the proportions of benefit that would be assessed to the lakefront owners, at this point, I can't hazard give you a firm answer on what that would be. We'd have to look at what the benefit to the farmland is versus what the benefit is to the road versus what benefit is to preserving the utilities, preserving access to Erie. And we have to consider all the different factors there and try and come up with a fair balance between benefit between all the different parties. It's not something you can just put a mathematical equation on. It's up to the engineer to consider all the reasons and come up with a fair split or distribution of benefit to each property.
And then my last question is just in regards to, it's twofold. The first one is, in your assessments and your estimates that you provided to us, is there, when you see these in construction, we all know how constructions has went up, peripherally in the last little bit. Is there a potential for this to be 10% higher, 15% higher? Because when you're talking like 300, 400,000, that sure looks a lot different than $9 million, right?
Yeah, we've tried to make our estimates generous, because the last thing you want to do is come in with a project that's 20% higher than you said originally. So we try and made our estimate on the rich side there, so trying to avoid that type of thing. But there is a clause in the act that says if the construction cost comes in more than 33 1/3% of the estimate, then it's sent back to council and the ratepayers to consider whether or not to proceed with the project at all. So there's a check and balance there on costs as well.
So Mr. Taylor or Brigden, will that be coming back to council again once the preliminary report, or is it, once this is approved, it is essentially moving forward? If the costs stay within that frame, it's just going to proceed as quoted?
Yes, so once council picks the, how it wants to proceed, Mr. McCready will go back and finish his final report. That final report will come to the drainage board, not to council. And at that point in time, landowners have a chance to do deputations again. And then, as Mr. McCready said, there's a second meeting that follows where like we talk more specifically about assessments, and official appeals can be made at that point in time. And the drainage board will hear those appeals and make a ruling specifically on each one of those appeals, whether they grant it or whether they don't.
Thank you. I certainly don't want to do nothing. I don't think that is an option, but I think making a decision today when there's still a lot of data out there, Councillor Doyle mentioned, I think it's really hard because it's such a large gravity decision for the residents out there. If it's okay with the mover and the seconder, I would like to add a number 3, Madam Clerk, that council direct administration to lobby the provincial and federal governments for funds for application to new shoreline protection along Erie Shore Drive and related engineering reports with the intention of those funds reducing and deferring costs to residents and agricultural lands and increasing protection. And if it's possible, I'd like 1, 2, and 3 voted separately, Mayor Caniff.
Councillor Crew, are you okay with this friendly amendment? Yes, okay. Councillor B. McGregor, yes, okay. So that's added, and you're requesting all 3 get voted on separately? Correct, okay. We get to see just how fast you can type here. No pressure.
Meredith now. You can carry on with more questions if you'd like.
Mayor Caniff, is it possible just to make one comment while she's commenting in regards to number 3?
Sure, we got to fill the airway somewhere.
There we go.
ahead.
So in a lot of the conversations that we've had in the past, a lot of times we hear that if there's not a plan or there's not a report or there's not an engineering solution, that it won't be considered. I think that now we've done a lot of work. There's a lot of stuff in place here. So now that if this does go through, that they should at least look at the documentation and hopefully at least consider the potential of some funds.
Councillor Scotchy, is that, can you just read that quickly to make sure you're good with? Oh, I can see it on my screen. You can't see my screen?
I know, it wasn't that one, but I gotta get the mouse again.
Any final words from the mover and seconder? Councillor Crew, you're good? Okay, with that, we'll put it to vote.
All right,
So
we
we're
will,
doing all three separately.
right. Okay, so we will vote on number 1 in the report. Council consider the preliminary report for the Burke Drain Works and instruct the drainage engineer to proceed with the preparation of a final report for the recommended option 1A under section 78 of the Drainage Act. Councillor Allen.
Yes.
Councillor Bondi.
Yes.
Councillor Sakachi.
No.
Councillor Crew.
Yes.
Councillor Doyle.
No.
Councillor Finn.
Yes.
Councillor Jubenville. Yes. Councillor McGrail.
Yes.
Councillor B. McGregor.
Yes.
Councillor C. McGregor.
Yes.
Councillor Pinsino.
Yes.
Councillor Story.
Yes.
Councillor Wright.
Yes.
And Mayor Caniff.
Yes.
Number 1 passes 12-2. Moving on to the second recommendation, council initiate abandonment under section 84-2 of the Drainage Act of all groins and seawalls that are part of the Burke Drainage Works. We'll go from the bottom to the top. Councillor Wright. Yes. Councillor Story.
Yes.
Councillor Pinsino.
Yes.
Councillor C. McGregor.
Yes.
Councillor B. McGregor.
Yes.
Councillor McGrail.
Yes.
Councillor Jubenville. Yes. Councillor Finn.
No.
Councillor Doyle. No. Councillor Crew.
Yes.
Councillor Sakachi. Councillor Bondi.
Yes.
Councillor Allen. Yes. And Mayor Caniff.
Yes.
All votes are in and motion passes 11-3. And finally, the third recommendation that's up on the screen that reads, as requested by the Erie Shore Drive property owners, wrong one. That council direct administration to lobby provincial and federal governments for funds for applications to new shoreline protection along Erie Shore Drive and related engineering reports with the intention of those funds reducing and deferring costs to residents and agricultural lands and increasing protection. Councillor Allen. Yes. Councillor Bondi.
Yes.
Councillor Sakachi. Councillor Crew.
Yes.
Councillor Doyle. Councillor Finn.
Yes.
Councillor Jubenville. Yes. Councillor McGrail.
Yes.
Councillor B. McGregor.
Yes.
Councillor C. McGregor.
Yes.
Councillor Pinsino.
Yes.
Councillor Story. Councillor Wright. Mayor Caniff.
Yes.
That passes 14-0.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll move on to the reading of the bylaws. Councillor Pinsino and Councillor McGrail, can I get you move the first and second reading, please?
So moved, your worship.
Anyone opposed? Motion carried. Third and final reading, Councillor Bondi and Councillor Finn.
So moved.
So seconded.
Anyone opposed? Motion carried. Councillor Crew, can I get you to do a resolution of council in closed session adjournment? And Councillor Jubenville, can I get you to second that?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I move that Chatham-Kent Council adjourn to its next meeting to be held on Monday, September 25th, 2023, and that Chatham-Kent Council authorize itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the Municipal Act. I so move.
Anyone opposed to wrapping it up at 7:21? Seeing none,